said this, and you guys know the quote, "The spirit of resistance to government is so valuable on certain occasions that I wish it to be always kept alive. It will often be exercised when wrong, but better so than not to be exercised at all. I like a little rebellion now and then. It is like a storm in the atmosphere." That was Thomas Jefferson. And ladies and gentlemen, while we're not here in a rebellious fashion necessarily, we are here for an age-old, time-tested tradition of exercising our freedom and our constitutional rights. Without further ado, I could go into some diatribe. I think you'd rather hear from people who are in touch with this subject matter and who have a lot to say about it. This gentleman I met a few years ago, he's a great guy. You all know him, and I'm just going to throw this out there. He's the state treasurer of the state of Nebraska. His name is Don Stenberg. Don, come on up.
Taxpayers are not a bottomless pit of money, but you would never know it by reading the decisions of the CIR. The CIR gives no consideration whatsoever to the cost of their decisions to the taxpayers. It's time to put a stop to this. The decisions about what are fair pay and benefits should be made by our state and local elected officials who are answerable to the voters and not an unaccountable appointed board. Elected officials can balance the ability of the taxpayers to support government payroll with the need to pay a fair wage. The CIR sets pay without regard to the tax burden it will place on the taxpayers. That is a recipe for unaffordable government. It has to stop. It's time to reform the CIR. It's time to place the decision-making back in the hands of our elected officials who are directly responsible to the voters. The time for CIR reform is now. Let's go and get it done. Thank you very much. It's now my pleasure to introduce the next speaker, and I will be brief in view of the weather. Mr. Bob Ebman, member of the State Board of Education.
Thank you, Don. It's a pleasure to be here. Last week in Milwaukee, we were treated to the spectacle of protesting teachers. Teachers who had abandoned students in their classrooms, leaving students behind to go to the Capitol to protest changes in the state's collective bargaining law that they oppose. We watched as teachers at the rally lined up openly in broad daylight to get phony doctor's excuses, intending to use these fraudulent notes not only to excuse their absence from school, but to get paid for it. These people who've been declared teachers are supposed to be teaching Milwaukee's children values and virtues. Instead, they make a public spectacle of themselves as open and notorious cheats. What kind of moral debilitation has Milwaukee put in its classrooms? When one considers the ethically empty people who would do such a thing, and to whom Milwaukee entrusts its children, is it any wonder that among the nation's 18 lowest performing urban schools, Milwaukee's achievement scores are near the bottom year after year? Now, the union leaders with whom I have spoken here in Nebraska have not tried to defend this indefensible conduct. Instead, they tell me that Nebraska isn't like that, and such things can't happen here. Really? Last Saturday, on these very steps, something did happen here. A rally brought to the steps of our Capitol by MoveOn.org, an incomparably leftist group that seeks to interfere with and prevent any meaningful state effort to stop the slide to fiscal ruin. Less than a week ago, MoveOn.org stood where I am standing now. So you can see, it is a foolish and dangerous thought, indeed, that somehow the state of Nebraska lives in a perpetual state of grace that protects us from the winds that blow across other states. The truth is that our state is on a trajectory that will send us straight to the same place where Wisconsin is now. The Nebraska CIR process today is an elaborate and costly joke that has stifled education innovation, straitjacketed teacher compensation, and created bargaining situations that are nothing short of bizarre. Thankfully, some of our legislative leaders have confronted this disaster and have introduced legislation to remake the CIR. One of those state senators is Tony Fulton, who will address this rally in a few minutes. Let me offer my own thanks publicly to Senator Fulton and his colleagues for their courageous work on this crucial issue. Unless the CIR process is radically changed in fundamental ways, it should be abandoned. If you want to see what our future will be like if we do nothing, cast your gaze a few states eastward to Wisconsin today. An old sage asked, if not now, when? If not me, then who? When it comes to CIR, if we are to save our state from the fate of Wisconsin, then we must work together now to support the efforts of our brave lawmakers to mend it or end it.
Hey, listen, it's cold. I'm going to cut to the chase. You're here because you care about the future of America. You care about the future of this state. You know we have to get spending under control, and the CIR is an impediment to do that. Local governments need the flexibility to deal with their employees fairly. The CIR is an impediment to that. We have to cut budgets in tough times. Right now in America, right now in Nebraska, we have to cut the budget. And the CIR is the problem. It has to be dealt with this session. You're here because you want to send a message to your elected leaders that this has to be done, and it has to be done now. We're not going to be the first generation in America that leaves this country worse off than we found it. It's not going to happen. Change starts now. Thank you for coming out here in the cold. I get the pleasure of introducing a change agent we all respect. His name's Tony Fulton. He's a great state senator. Tony, come on out.
We in government derive our authority from the consent of the governed. Why do I point this out? Because the CIR that we have before us today was given to us in 1969. I didn't even exist. Okay? And I think part of the confusion that we see today, part of the lack of understanding about the CIR, has to do with the fact that it never received a public hearing in 1969. Did you know that the CIR we have before us today came to us via an amendment that occurred not even on the first round of debate, but on the second round of debate? And if you go back and you look through the records, there wasn't even that much debate on it. It came upon the people of Nebraska without the people of Nebraska understanding it. And I tell you what, when I came to the legislature, I couldn't have told you the difference between the CIR and the CIA. And I'd be willing to bet that 99% of Nebraskans couldn't tell you how the CIR works. I wonder why. We didn't have the proper process by which we could grasp the very laws that govern us. So how does the CIR work now? I want to give you an example that I hope you'll share with your friends. Now, I like math, so forgive me those who don't like math. If I give you $10 and ask you to run your agency, and let's say you have 8 employees, each of whom make $1, how much do you have left to run your agency? $2. $2. Granted, this is a pretty crazy example, but you get where I'm going with this. If there's a ruling by the CIR that orders you to give raises of 10% to everyone that you employ, you have 3 options. You either can raise taxes, or you can take money out of that $2 you use to operate your agency, or you can make a cut. Now, if you're very efficient and you have no more room to take $2 out of your agency, then you're going to be faced with 2 prospects: either raise taxes or lay someone off. We're not going to raise taxes because Nebraska's taxes are high enough. And that leaves our elected officials with only one choice: lay someone off. I've just given you a scenario in which our public sector employees, indeed public servants, and the people who are elected to make decisions about our budget, don't have any say as to whether those people get to keep a job. That decision was made by an unelected body called the CIR. Does that make any sense? No! It needs, therefore, to be reformed. Last year, I brought forward 3 bills to reform the CIR. I was disappointed. The Business and Labor Committee, which has jurisdiction over these matters, did not advance those bills for debate. I've stuck with it. You've stuck with me. I thank you. And now there are a number of bills before this committee. And I dare say that committee is debating whether indeed to put a bill forward. And I dare say they will put something forward. Now, will that which is put forward represent meaningful reform? That's where you come in. Pay close attention to what comes out of that committee. If it is not meaningful reform, if it is simply nibbling around the edges, then we need to go back and start over. And I'll tell you what, 1969 is when this was given to us. This may be our only chance to reform this CIR, such that public sector employees and private sector employees and all Nebraskans have a clear understanding of what our CIR does. That, after all, is how you can give consent about the very laws that we have to live by. Is that asking too much? No! So I ask you to pay close attention and tell your friends, let us see meaningful reform of the CIR so that we can put the decisions that are to be made by our elected officials indeed in the hands of elected officials. Thank you for being here. Pay close attention. This has just begun.
The points I want to make is that the government should have the right to debate and decide how to balance their own budgets. And we've been talking on the floor this morning just at the county level, with the county board, and being able to, with the shortage of funds, balance their budgets and do what is necessary without undue objections. And it's especially important on our state level with the shortfalls that we have that our governor and officials can take the stand and do the measures that they need and in coordination with the legislature then get a balanced budget. I want to make the point that collective bargaining is not a fundamental right. It is a privilege granted by the legislature and it can be taken away by the legislature. Okay, the current process that we have right now hurts working families and seniors by forcing tax increases on those people who cannot afford it to benefit those who are doing better than a lot of people in the private sector. And government employees, at this point in time, things have been turned around over a period of years. Not in every case, but in a lot of cases, government employees have benefits which far exceed those of our private sector employees. And I think we need to be able to, one way or another, curtail some of those benefits and get a little more even playing field, whatever it takes. I introduced LB 664, which would do away with collective bargaining altogether for public employees. I would hope that we will see that come out to the floor so that we can debate it get it on the floor one way or another, hopefully through the committee process. The other one is constitutional or legislative resolution 29CA, which is a constitutional amendment doing the same thing, which could go to the people. If we aren't able to talk about it and make some decisions on the floor of the legislature for the benefit of all of us who are interested in reform here, then at least the people in Nebraska would have an opportunity to speak and make the decision. And I think, from what I understand, they would be in favor of what we're proposing in both that legislative resolution and LB 664. So with that, I want to thank you for coming and appreciate your support, and we're going to continue to do all we can to get a meaningful and substantial reform here one way or another with the CIR.
Hey, I wanted to introduce a really special guest. It's been advertised, and this woman is the first governor that I ever voted for. She looks really young.
She's the only one who's we gotta let these people get home. I'm Governor Kay Orr. And I'm braving the cold like you are because I understand as a former governor, the need for change in the CIR. And I came here today to support the efforts by Senator Tony Fulton and Senator John Nelson, and I know our Governor Heineman is very interested as well, knowing that the changes are absolutely necessary for the good of the state of Nebraska. Continue your support however you can, by your letters, your calls, by talking to your neighbors and explaining those things that Tony so aptly described. A lot of people don't understand this issue. Help them to do that. God bless you all.
When Kay Orr pushes you away from a microphone, you go. Yes. Thank you all for coming. There's people that have come from, first of all, most of us we're Nebraskans. But I want to send a message out. I want to tell you folks something. I want people to hear this as clearly as they possibly can. A guy like Scott Walker probably feels like he's on an island sometimes. A guy like Scott Walker probably feels like the whole world is against him. People in Ohio, people in Colorado, people in Iowa, sometimes the people that make tough decisions feel like they're on an island. You guys, they're not on an island. They're not on an island. They need our help. This legislature is not on an island. They need our help. They need our letters. They need our communication because they work for us. Scott Walker's trying to do a job for the citizens of Wisconsin. Whether people think it's right or wrong, he's trying to do a job. Our senators, our governor are trying to do a job, and they need to hear from you. I want to thank you all for coming out. I wish we'd have picked yesterday in a weird way, but why don't you go to a basketball game or go inside and talk to your state senator? It's about 12:33. We're 27 minutes ahead of the curve. Thank you all for coming. There are legislative booklets, directories if you need some. Thank you all for coming. God bless you. God bless Nebraska, and God bless the United States of America.